Sometimes the people treated like they matter the least are the ones connected to the power no one sees coming. The scream of brakes cut through the busy Atlanta afternoon as Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out of his patrol car with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of never being questioned. Crowds moved around the downtown square carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Street musicians played beneath the flickering glow of storefront signs, and traffic crawled slowly through the intersection under the humid Georgia heat. Then everything stopped. An elderly black woman stood frozen near the edge of the sidewalk, clutching 2 paper grocery bags against her chest, while Ryan marched toward her with narrowed eyes and a hand already resting near his belt. "Ma'am, I need you to stay right there." He barked loud enough for nearby pedestrians to turn and stare. The woman blinked in confusion, her gray curls moving slightly in the warm wind. "Officer, is something wrong?" she asked softly. But Ryan barely listened. A young white woman standing beside a luxury SUV pointed across the street with shaking hands. "That's her," she insisted. "I saw her near my purse before it disappeared." The accusation floated through the air like gasoline finding a spark. People slowed their steps. Phones began rising quietly into the air. The elderly woman tightened her grip on her groceries. "I didn't take anything," she said carefully. "I was just heading home." Ryan's jaw clenched harder. To him, her calm voice sounded disrespectful, almost challenging. "Then you won't mind if I search your bags?" he snapped. The woman hesitated for half a second, more startled than defiant. But that tiny pause was enough for Ryan to step closer. One grocery bag slipped from her hand and crashed against the sidewalk, oranges rolling into the street while a carton of eggs cracked open beside the curb. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Please," the woman whispered, embarrassed eyes darting toward the people filming her. "My name is Evelyn Brooks. You're making a mistake." But Ryan only heard what he wanted to hear. The years of complaints buried inside his personnel file, the whispers from other officers, the unchecked arrogance that came from never facing consequences. All of it surfaced in that moment. "Funny how it's always a mistake," he muttered coldly. Evelyn bent slowly to pick up the fallen groceries, but Ryan suddenly grabbed her arm to pull her back toward the sidewalk. The movement was rough enough to make her stumble. Several people flinched. One teenager quietly said, "Yo, she's old, man." Another person whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Yet nobody stepped forward. Nobody wanted to become part of the scene unfolding beneath the flashing police lights. Evelyn steadied herself against a nearby bench, breathing carefully while humiliation burned across her face stronger than the summer heat. Her purse had fallen open during the commotion, and from inside it, a silver military medal slipped onto the concrete with a sharp metallic clink. Ryan glanced down at it for barely a second before nudging it aside with his boot like it meant nothing. But standing 10 feet away, Detective Lena Torres suddenly froze when she noticed the engraved name catching sunlight across the metal surface. And in that exact moment, somewhere hundreds of miles away inside a secure military briefing room, a phone began vibrating across a steel table. The vibration of the phone against the steel conference table barely made a sound, but inside the silent military briefing room, every head turned anyway. Commander Isaiah Brooks had been standing in front of a digital operations map moments earlier, calm and focused as he discussed extraction routes with a group of special operations officers dressed in tactical uniforms. The room smelled faintly of black coffee and machine oil, and the low hum of projectors filled the tense silence between conversations. Isaiah rarely looked distracted during briefings. In 15 years of service, men under his command had watched him remain composed through storms that would have shattered most people. But when the phone continued vibrating across the table, something shifted in the room. One of the younger officers reached toward it automatically before stopping himself. The name on the screen read simply, "Mom." Isaiah glanced down, and for the first time that morning, his expression changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for the room to feel colder. He picked up the phone and noticed several missed calls from an unknown Atlanta number, followed by a flood of incoming messages. Then another notification appeared. Video attachment received. The room remained quiet as Isaiah pressed play. At first, all he could hear was traffic noise and people shouting over each other. The camera angle shook wildly as whoever recorded it pushed through a crowd downtown. Then the image stabilized. His mother stood near a sidewalk bench under flashing police lights, one hand pressed against her chest, while groceries lay scattered across the concrete around her feet. Isaiah did not blink. He simply stared at the screen while Officer Ryan Mercer towered over Evelyn Brooks, with visible irritation written across his face. The officer said something muffled beneath the noise of the crowd before grabbing Evelyn by the arm again, as several people gasped nearby. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Across the room, Captain Daniel Reeves slowly lowered the folder in his hands. He had worked with Isaiah for almost 8 years and understood something most people did not. The commander was at his most dangerous when he became completely silent. Nobody in the room moved while the video continued playing. A teenage voice somewhere behind the camera said, "Leave her alone, man." Another person whispered nervously, "Someone should stop this." But nobody did. Nobody except Detective Aaliyah Torres apparently, because the footage briefly showed a dark-haired detective stepping forward through the crowd while staring at the military medal now lying near Evelyn's purse. The video ended abruptly seconds later, freezing on Ryan Mercer's face beneath the flashing blue patrol lights. Isaiah lowered the phone slowly. "Commander?" Captain Reeves asked carefully. Isaiah did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the black screen in his hand, as though replaying the moment privately inside his mind. Finally, he reached down and removed the tactical gloves from his hands one finger at a time. The sound alone echoed through the briefing room louder than anyone expected. "Cancel the afternoon exercises," Isaiah said calmly. "Sir?" one lieutenant asked. Isaiah slipped the gloves into his pocket and looked toward the operations window overlooking the base runway. "I need transport to Atlanta immediately." Nobody questioned him after that. They did not need to, because every person in the room understood one thing at the exact same moment. Somewhere in downtown Atlanta, a police officer had just crossed a line he did not even realize existed. Back near the crowded square, Detective Aaliyah Torres crouched carefully beside the fallen silver medal while Evelyn sat quietly against the bench trying to steady her breathing. Ryan Mercer continued speaking with dispatch, unaware that Lena's eyes had locked onto the engraving beneath the military insignia. Her heartbeat slowed the second she finished reading the name. "Commander Isaiah Brooks, United States Special Operations Command." Lena looked back toward Evelyn, then slowly toward Ryan standing beside his patrol car, with total confidence still written across his face. And for the first time since arriving on scene, Detective Aaliyah Torres felt something close to fear. The crowd outside the downtown square kept growing with every passing minute, drawn toward the flashing patrol lights the same way people gathered around storms they secretly hoped would not touch them. Some stood on tiptoe holding phones above their heads while others whispered quietly behind paper coffee cups and dark sunglasses. The late afternoon sun hung low between the glass buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where Evelyn Brooks remained seated near the bench with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her dignity was still intact, but barely. Detective Aaliyah Torres could see it in the woman's eyes. Not fear, not panic, exhaustion. The kind that came from living long enough to recognize when people had already decided who you were before you ever opened your mouth. Ryan Mercer paced beside his patrol vehicle, speaking loudly into his radio while trying to maintain control of the scene. "Dispatch confirmed the complainant is still missing a wallet," he announced, confidently, making sure the crowd could hear him. "We are conducting a lawful investigation." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone performing authority rather than simply using it. Lena remained crouched beside the silver medal in her hand. The medal felt heavier than it should have. Commander Isaiah Brooks. Even now she could hardly believe it. She had heard that name before during a federal training seminar 2 years earlier. People did not casually mention commanders from special operations unless the situation was serious. Men like Isaiah Brooks operated in places most officers only saw in classified documentaries and headlines buried deep beneath international news. Yet somehow his mother was sitting bruised and humiliated on a public sidewalk while strangers recorded her suffering for social media. Lena slowly stood and approached Evelyn carefully. "Ma'am," she said softly, lowering her voice beneath the noise of the crowd. "Do you need medical assistance?" Evelyn looked up at her with calm, tired eyes. "I just want to go home," she answered quietly. There was no anger in her voice. Somehow that made the entire scene worse. Lena glanced toward Ryan again before leaning slightly closer. Is Commander Isaiah Brooks your son? For the first time since the confrontation began, something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Not pride exactly, more like concern. She looked away toward the busy street, as if silently debating whether to answer. Finally, she nodded once. Yes, she whispered. But please do not call him. Lena stared at her in disbelief. Ma'am, with respect, I think he deserves to know. Evelyn gave a faint smile that barely reached her eyes. My son has spent his whole life running toward danger for other people, she said softly. I did not raise him to carry the weight of mine too. Those words lingered inside Lena's chest long after the conversation ended. Across the street, Ryan suddenly motioned toward Evelyn again. She still has not explained why she resisted a lawful search. He snapped loudly, clearly irritated that parts of the crowd were beginning to turn against him. A young man near the curb shouted back, "Because you embarrassed her for no reason." Another voice added, "Somebody already found the missing wallet at the coffee shop." The atmosphere changed instantly. Ryan froze for half a second before glaring toward the crowd. Who said that? He demanded. But the damage had already begun. Murmurs spread through the square faster than traffic noise. The missing wallet had been found nearly 20 minutes earlier, according to a barista standing near the edge of the crowd. Several people exchanged uneasy looks. One woman slowly lowered her phone, suddenly realizing she might have witnessed something far more serious than a misunderstanding. Ryan's posture stiffened. He glanced toward Lena, expecting support, but instead he found her standing beside Evelyn with the military medal still resting in her palm. Their eyes met across the flashing blue lights. In that moment, Ryan realized something was wrong. Very wrong. And somewhere above the city skyline, a military transport jet was already cutting through darkening clouds on a direct course toward Atlanta. The energy in the square had changed completely now, and Officer Ryan Mercer could feel it even if he refused to admit it out loud. Only 30 minutes earlier, the crowd had watched him with cautious silence, the automatic obedience that usually followed a police badge wherever he went. But now the same people who once avoided eye contact were whispering openly while staring at him with growing distrust. The flashing patrol lights reflected off nearby store windows as tension spread across the humid Atlanta evening like a storm cloud rolling slowly over the city. Ryan stood beside his cruiser pretending to review notes on his tablet, but his focus kept drifting toward Detective Lena Torres and Evelyn Brooks sitting quietly near the bench. Something about the way Lena looked at him now unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. She was no longer acting like backup on scene. She was watching him the way investigators watch suspects before asking difficult questions. Ryan slipped his tablet under one arm and walked toward them with controlled irritation. "Detective," he said sharply, "I have this situation under control." Lena turned slowly to face him. "Do you?" she asked calmly. Ryan clenched his jaw. The complainant identified her. "I followed procedure. The missing wallet was found at the coffee shop almost 20 minutes ago," Lena replied. "You never updated your approach after that information came in." Ryan scoffed under his breath. She resisted cooperation. Evelyn finally looked up from the bench, her voice soft but steady. "I asked why I was being accused." Ryan immediately pointed toward her. "See? That attitude right there." Several people nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older man shook his head quietly while continuing to film from across the sidewalk. Ryan noticed the cameras again and suddenly felt sweat forming beneath the collar of his uniform despite the evening breeze beginning to cool the city streets. He had been recorded before. Every officer had. But this felt different. The crowd was no longer documenting a routine encounter. They were waiting for something. Waiting for consequences. Lena stepped slightly closer to Ryan and lowered her voice. "You need to de-escalate this right now." Ryan frowned. "Why are you acting like this is some federal case?" Lena held the silver medal carefully in her hand before looking directly into his eyes. "Because you have no idea who her son is." For a moment, Ryan almost laughed. The statement sounded ridiculous to him. Another attempt to intimidate an officer doing his job. He had seen it before. Politicians, wealthy families, angry relatives, threatening lawsuits and connections. None of it impressed him anymore. "I do not care who her son is," Ryan answered coldly. "Nobody gets special treatment." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly at those words, as though she had heard versions of them her entire life. Lena studied Ryan carefully before speaking again. "Her son is Commander Isaiah Brooks." The noise of the city seemed to fade for one strange second. Ryan blinked once. Who? Lena's expression hardened. United States Special Operations Command. Ryan forced out a short, dismissive laugh, even though something inside his stomach tightened unexpectedly. And I am supposed to care about that? Lena did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced upward toward the darkening sky beyond the tall buildings surrounding the square. Ryan followed her gaze instinctively. At first he heard nothing except distant traffic and the faint sound of sirens several blocks away. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a low rumble began echoing across the city skyline. The sound was deep, mechanical, steady. Not police helicopters. Something larger. Several people in the crowd noticed it too and started looking upward with confused expressions. Evelyn opened her eyes again but remained completely calm, her hands still folded gently in her lap despite everything that had happened. She looked more worried than angry now. Lena leaned closer toward Ryan one final time. You still have time to fix this, she whispered. But before Ryan could answer, 3 black SUVs turned the corner at the far end of the street and rolled silently toward the crowded square without lights, without sirens, and without a single wasted movement. The 3 black SUVs moved slowly through the crowded Atlanta street with a level of precision that immediately silenced the square. Nobody shouted anymore. Nobody laughed or whispered. Even the traffic noise seemed distant now as pedestrians stepped aside instinctively, creating a clear path along the curb without being asked. The vehicles stopped one after another beside the flashing patrol lights, their dark windows reflecting the glow of nearby storefronts and the nervous faces of the growing crowd. Officer Ryan Mercer stood frozen beside his cruiser, trying to convince himself this was all some dramatic misunderstanding. But deep inside, the confidence he carried so casually earlier had already started cracking apart. The first SUV door opened. 2 men in dark tactical jackets stepped out, scanning the area with calm, disciplined eyes that never lingered too long in one place. They did not move like local law enforcement. They moved with the quiet awareness of people trained to notice every detail in a room before speaking a single word. A third man exited from the second SUV carrying a secure tablet against his chest. None of them looked angry. Somehow that made the atmosphere even heavier. Ryan instinctively straightened his posture. What is this? He muttered under his breath. Detective Lena Torres remained silent beside Evelyn Brooks, her eyes fixed on the final SUV as its rear passenger door slowly opened. Commander Isaiah Brooks stepped onto the pavement wearing a dark charcoal uniform beneath a fitted tactical coat. He was taller than most men around him, broad-shouldered without appearing bulky, carrying himself with the kind of controlled stillness that immediately changed the energy of the entire street. Several people in the crowd lowered their phones without even realizing they were doing it. Isaiah looked first at his mother. Not at Ryan. Not at the officers. Just Evelyn. The moment his eyes found her sitting quietly beside the bench, something almost invisible flickered across his face. Concern. Pain. Guilt. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed slightly the second she saw him. Isaiah, she whispered softly. He crossed the sidewalk toward her without rushing. Every movement remained calm and measured. When he finally reached the bench, he knelt slightly in front of her and gently picked up one of the grocery bags that had split open earlier. Crushed oranges rested against broken eggs inside the torn paper sack. Isaiah stared at the ruined groceries for a long second before carefully setting the bag aside. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. Evelyn gave a small shake of her head, even though the exhaustion in her eyes told another story. I am all right, she answered. I just wanted to go home. Isaiah nodded once. Then slowly he stood and turned toward Officer Ryan Mercer for the very first time. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Ryan forced himself to step forward despite the pressure building in his chest. Sir, he began defensively. Your mother matched the description connected to a reported theft. I followed department procedure. Isaiah said nothing at first. He simply looked at Ryan with an unreadable expression while the city lights reflected faintly across his dark eyes. Ryan had dealt with angry relatives before. Usually they yelled, threatened lawsuits, demanded badges and names. But Isaiah Brooks did none of those things. His restraint felt far more intimidating than anger ever could. Finally, Isaiah glanced toward Detective Lena Torres. Was the wallet recovered? He asked calmly. Lena nodded immediately. 23 minutes ago. Coffee shop employee confirmed it. Isaiah looked back at Ryan again. And my mother was informed of that before being publicly detained. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out right away. Around them, the crowd listened carefully, phones rising once more into the air as tension wrapped tighter around the square. Somewhere nearby, a police radio crackled softly beneath the growing silence. Then Isaiah noticed the silver medal still resting in Lena's hand. He reached for it carefully and brushed his thumb across the scratched engraving before looking down at Evelyn again. His voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Mom," he asked quietly, "how long were you sitting here alone before someone finally treated you like a human being?" The question hung over the crowded square heavier than the humid evening air, and for several long seconds nobody answered it. Not Officer Ryan Mercer. Not the people recording from the sidewalks. Not even Detective Lena Torres, standing only a few feet away beneath the flashing blue patrol lights. Evelyn Brooks lowered her eyes quietly, as though she did not want the truth spoken aloud in front of strangers. But Isaiah already understood more than enough from the silence itself. Around them, the city continued moving in distant fragments. A train horn echoed somewhere across downtown Atlanta. Music drifted faintly from a rooftop restaurant nearby. Yet inside the square, everything felt frozen in place, trapped beneath the weight of humiliation that still lingered around Evelyn like invisible smoke. Isaiah slipped the silver military medal carefully back into his mother's purse before turning toward Ryan again. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was now a sharpness in his eyes that had not been there moments earlier. "Officer," he said evenly, "did my mother ever threaten you?" Ryan shifted his stance. No. Did she resist physically? She refused to cooperate. During an active investigation. Isaiah held his gaze. That was not my question. Ryan swallowed subtly as more phones lifted into the air around them. The crowd could sense the balance of power changing now, not through shouting or intimidation, but through something quieter and far more uncomfortable. Accountability. Ryan cleared his throat. No, he admitted stiffly. Isaiah nodded once. Then why was she treated like a public danger instead of a citizen? Ryan opened his mouth again, but the answer never came. Because somewhere deep down, even he knew the truth sounded ugly once spoken aloud. Detective Lena Torres finally stepped forward, holding her own department tablet. "Commander," she said carefully. Multiple bystanders recorded the interaction from different angles. "Internal Affairs has already been notified." Ryan's head snapped toward her. "You called Internal Affairs?" Lena did not flinch. "I followed procedure." The words hit Ryan harder than he expected because they sounded exactly like the defense he himself had been repeating all evening. For the first time since arriving at the scene, uncertainty spread visibly across his face. The tactical officers near the SUVs remained silent and motionless, scanning the area with disciplined calm, while pedestrians gathered farther back behind police barriers. One of the younger officers quietly handed Isaiah a phone displaying social media feeds exploding with live-stream clips from the square. Thousands of viewers were already watching the incident unfold online in real time. Hashtags began spreading faster than the police department could contain them. Some posts showed Evelyn sitting alone beside the bench while groceries rolled across the sidewalk. Others focused on Ryan's aggressive tone during the confrontation. The internet had already decided this was no ordinary misunderstanding. Isaiah glanced briefly at the screen before handing the phone back without emotion. "Turn the live streams off near my mother," he instructed quietly. "She has suffered enough attention for one day." Even now, with every reason to expose the situation further, his focus remained on protecting Evelyn's dignity instead of humiliating the officer responsible. That detail did not go unnoticed by the crowd. Evelyn looked up at her son with tired eyes. "Isaiah," she said softly, "do not make this bigger than it already is." He knelt slightly beside her again, lowering his voice enough that only those closest could hear. "Mom, you spent your whole life teaching me that silence helps the wrong people sleep peacefully." Evelyn's eyes filled with sadness at those words because she knew he was right. Nearby, Ryan's police radio suddenly crackled with an incoming transmission from dispatch. "Officer Mercer, return to Channel 2 immediately. Captain Mills is requesting direct communication." Ryan grabbed the radio quickly, but before he could respond, another patrol car pulled into the square. Captain Howard Mills stepped out wearing a grim expression that instantly made Ryan's stomach tighten. Mills was not a man who arrived personally unless the situation had already become dangerous for the department. The captain surveyed the crowd, the cameras, the tactical vehicles, and finally Evelyn Brooks sitting quietly beside the bench. Then his eyes landed on Isaiah. In that exact moment, the color drained slightly from his face. Captain Howard Mills had spent 27 years working inside the Atlanta Police Department, and during that time, he had learned how to recognize disasters before they fully exploded. The moment he stepped out of his patrol vehicle and saw Commander Isaiah Brooks standing beside the bench near Evelyn Brooks, he understood this situation was already far beyond local control. The flashing blue lights painted faint reflections across the captain's face as he adjusted his hat and slowly approached the center of the square. Around him, the crowd parted carefully while dozens of phones continued recording every movement. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Officer Ryan Mercer walked quickly toward his captain with visible frustration. "Sir, this whole thing is getting blown out of proportion," he said under his breath. The suspect matched the description and Mills raised one hand immediately, silencing him before the sentence could finish. "Do not say another word. Right now." Ryan froze. It was the first time all evening someone with authority had spoken to him that way publicly. Mills turned his attention toward Isaiah, whose calm posture somehow carried more pressure than anger ever could. The tactical officers near the SUVs remained still and disciplined, their presence quiet but impossible to ignore beneath the downtown skyline. "Commander Brooks," Mills said respectfully, extending his hand. "I am Captain Howard Mills. I was just briefed on the situation." Isaiah shook his hand once. "Firm. Controlled. Then you already know the wallet was recovered before my mother continued being detained." Mills glanced briefly toward Ryan before answering. "Yes, I know." A painful silence settled over the group. Evelyn Brooks remained seated quietly near the bench, watching the conversation unfold with tired eyes that carried decades of disappointment far older than tonight's incident. Nearby, Detective Lena Torres handed a department tablet to Captain Mills. "Sir, multiple civilian videos have already spread online," she explained carefully. "There is also body camera footage from Officer Mercer's unit." Ryan immediately turned toward her. "You pulled my body cam without authorization?" "Internal Affairs authorized emergency review 20 minutes ago," Lena replied calmly. Ryan looked stunned. The ground beneath him was disappearing faster now, every layer of confidence peeling away in front of the crowd and cameras surrounding the square. Mills opened the body camera footage on the tablet, while several officers nearby instinctively looked away. The audio was impossible to ignore. Ryan's voice sounded harsher than he remembered, louder and more aggressive against the frightened confusion in Evelyn's responses. Every command, every accusation, every unnecessary escalation. The footage removed excuses the same way daylight removes shadows. Mills watched in complete silence until the video reached the moment the grocery bag fell and the silver military medal rolled onto the sidewalk. Ryan shifted uncomfortably as everyone nearby saw him brush it aside with his boot. The captain slowly lowered the tablet. "Officer Mercer," he said quietly, "did you verify probable cause after dispatch updated the wallet recovery?" Ryan hesitated too long. "Sir, I was securing the scene. That was not my question." Ryan swallowed hard. "No, sir." Mills closed his eyes briefly, disappointment written across his face. The crowd had gone almost completely silent now, hanging on to every word. Somewhere across the street, a television news van pulled up beside the growing line of police vehicles. Reporters were arriving. Livestream numbers were climbing. This was no longer a contained incident. It was becoming a national story in real time. Isaiah looked toward his mother again before speaking softly. "Captain, my concern is not embarrassment. My concern is how easily this happened to someone who never resisted, never threatened anyone, and never deserved to be treated like a criminal." Mills nodded slowly because there was no defense left to offer. He turned back toward Ryan with the expression of a man forced to confront a failure larger than one officer alone. "Remove your badge and radio," he ordered quietly. Ryan blinked in disbelief. "Sir." Immediately, a murmur swept through the crowd. Ryan's face lost color as realization finally hit him completely. Not just fear of suspension, not fear of discipline, something deeper. The understanding that for the first time in his career, nobody was protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. With shaking hands, Ryan slowly reached toward his uniform while cameras captured every second. And sitting quietly beside the bench, Evelyn Brooks lowered her eyes as though none of this victory felt satisfying at all. Officer Ryan Mercer stared down at the badge in his trembling hand as though he no longer recognized it. For years, that small piece of metal had represented authority, protection, and control. People listened when he spoke because of it. People moved when he ordered them to. But standing in the middle of the crowded Atlanta square beneath hundreds of recording phones and flashing news cameras, the badge suddenly felt heavier than he could carry. Captain Howard Mills waited silently with an outstretched hand while the noise of helicopters now echoed faintly above the city skyline. Ryan's breathing became shallow. "Captain," he said quietly, struggling to hold on to what little dignity he had left. "I was trying to do my job." Mills looked at him with tired disappointment instead of anger. "Your job was never the problem," he answered. "The way you chose to see people was." The words landed harder than public suspension ever could. Around them, reporters had already begun gathering behind the police barriers while live-stream comments flooded across thousands of screens nationwide. Some people in the crowd looked satisfied. Others looked disturbed. But Evelyn Brooks looked only exhausted. She remained seated beside the bench with her hands folded gently together, avoiding the cameras now turning her humiliation into headlines. Isaiah noticed it immediately. He stepped quietly between his mother and the nearest television crew without saying a word, shielding her from the growing frenzy with nothing more than his presence. Detective Lena Torres watched him carefully. The commander had every reason to destroy Ryan publicly in that moment. One statement to the media, one angry speech, one emotional outburst. The crowd would have supported every second of it. Instead, Isaiah stayed calm, controlled, focused entirely on protecting his mother rather than humiliating the officer who failed her. That restraint unsettled Ryan more than rage ever could. Mills finally took the badge and radio from Ryan's hands while another officer documented the suspension procedure. The clicking sound of cameras filled the air like rainfall against concrete. Ryan lowered his head as whispers spread through the crowd around him. For the first time all evening, he understood what public shame actually felt like. Not because he lost authority, because everyone could now see the version of himself he spent years refusing to confront. Lena stepped closer toward Captain Mills and quietly handed him another tablet notification. "Sir," she said carefully, "the body camera footage has already been forwarded to Internal Affairs and City Oversight." Mills nodded grimly. "Understood." Ryan looked up immediately. "Captain, please," he said, in a lower voice, panic beginning to slip through the cracks of his composure. "You know how fast things get twisted online." Mills held his gaze. "Nothing twisted the footage, Ryan. We all watched it exactly as it happened." Silence followed, painful and complete. A few feet away, Evelyn slowly attempted to stand from the bench, but Isaiah gently steadied her arm before she lost balance. "I can walk," she insisted softly. "I know," he answered, "but you should not have had to carry this alone today." Those words seemed to affect the crowd more than any suspension announcement ever could. Several bystanders lowered their phones completely now, shame crossing some of their faces as they remembered how long they stood watching before anyone truly stepped in to help. One young woman near the curb quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Another man stared down at the livestream screen in his hand before ending the recording altogether. The spectacle was no longer entertaining. It had become human. Isaiah reached down and picked up the final unbroken orange from the damaged grocery bag beside the bench. He turned it slowly in his hand for a second before placing it gently back into the sack. Such a small, ordinary gesture somehow made the entire scene feel heavier. Because this was never really about a wallet, or procedure, or even one officer's mistake. It was about how quickly dignity could be stripped from someone when people stopped seeing them as fully human. Captain Mills exhaled slowly before stepping toward Evelyn himself. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "on behalf of this department, I am deeply sorry." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment beneath the glow of the city lights. Her expression held sadness more than anger. "Captain," she answered softly, "an apology matters most when it changes something." Mills lowered his eyes because he knew she was right. Nearby, Ryan stood completely alone now beside the patrol car that once made him feel untouchable. The crowd no longer looked at him with fear or respect, only silence. And sometimes silence is where karma speaks the loudest. The crowd slowly began to disperse beneath the glowing Atlanta skyline, but the silence left behind felt heavier than the noise that came before it. News vans remained parked along the curb while reporters continued speaking quietly into cameras beneath bright overhead lights. Yet the center of attention was no longer Officer Ryan Mercer standing beside his patrol car without a badge. It was Evelyn Brooks carefully stepping toward the waiting black SUV with her son beside her, moving through the chaos with quiet dignity that no humiliation had managed to break. Isaiah opened the passenger door gently for his mother, while one of the tactical officers placed the remaining groceries into the rear vehicle. Most of the fruit had been ruined. The eggs were shattered beyond saving. Such ordinary losses should have meant nothing compared to everything else that happened that evening. Yet Evelyn stared at the torn grocery bag with sadness that reached deeper than inconvenience. It reminded her how quickly peace could disappear from an ordinary afternoon. Before getting into the SUV, she paused and looked back across the square one final time. Flashing police lights reflected across wet pavement from a recent street cleaning truck nearby, turning the ground into shifting blue mirrors beneath the city lights. Officer Ryan Mercer remained standing alone near the curb, while internal affairs investigators had already begun speaking quietly with Captain Howard Mills. No one surrounded Ryan anymore. No officers rushed to defend him. No crowd feared him. The authority he once carried so casually had vanished in less than 2 hours, replaced by something far more difficult to escape. Reflection. Ryan noticed Evelyn looking toward him and instinctively lowered his eyes. For the first time that night, he understood she had never looked at him with hatred, even after everything. And somehow that realization hurt more than public disgrace. Isaiah followed his mother's gaze toward Ryan before speaking softly beside her. "You do not owe him your attention." Evelyn remained silent for a moment. Then she answered quietly, "No, but maybe he owes himself the truth." Isaiah studied her face carefully. Even now, after the humiliation, after the accusations, after being treated like a threat in front of strangers, she still spoke with compassion instead of bitterness. That was the part of her strength most people never understood. It was not weakness that kept her calm. It was wisdom earned through survival. Captain Mills approached slowly as the media lights continued flashing in the distance. The exhaustion in his face seemed deeper now, as though the entire department's failures had suddenly settled onto his shoulders at once. "Mrs. Brooks," he said respectfully, "transport is ready if you would like medical evaluation." Evelyn shook her head gently. "I just want to go home." Mills nodded. "Understood." Then he looked toward Isaiah. "Commander Brooks, Internal Affairs will pursue a full investigation. I promise you that." Isaiah's expression remained controlled. "Captain, this was never only about one officer." Mills exhaled quietly because he knew exactly what Isaiah meant. Systems did not fail all at once. They failed slowly, one ignored warning at a time, one unchecked attitude at a time, one moment of silence from good people standing nearby at a time. Detective Lena Torres stepped closer, holding the silver military medal one last time before returning it carefully to Evelyn. "I believe this belongs with you," she said softly. Evelyn accepted it with both hands, running her fingers across the scratched engraving beneath the city lights. The medal had survived war zones, deployments, and decades of memories. Tonight it survived humiliation too. Isaiah helped his mother into the SUV before walking around toward the opposite door. But just before entering, he stopped and looked back toward the square filled with cameras, officers, and strangers still trying to process everything they witnessed. His voice remained calm when he finally spoke, but every person nearby heard the weight behind his words. "Power is not proven by who you can humiliate," he said quietly. "It is proven by who you choose to protect when nobody else will." Nobody answered him. They did not need to. Because somewhere deep inside the silence hanging over downtown Atlanta, every person there understood the same painful truth. A badge could command fear. For a moment. But dignity would always outlive intimidation. And as the black SUVs finally disappeared into the glowing city traffic, Officer Ryan Mercer stood alone beneath the fading patrol lights, realizing that the woman he saw as powerless had carried more strength than he ever understood.